But the most important thing across all of those, and this is, again, something that's been very striking to me, it's passion. So if the professor is able to demonstrate their passion for what they do, that's the most important thing. And I think that probably resonates pretty clearly with most folks who have kind of reflected on this.
Just heard Jared Keeley from Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. Garth interviewed Jared for episode 255 of Psych Sessions, conversations about teaching and stuff.
As a listener of this podcast, you're already passionate about psychology, and Sage College Publishing helps you bring that passion into the classroom. Sage is an independent publisher focused on the social sciences. Beyond leading psychology research journals, Sage has deep roots in the discipline and offers textbooks across the entire major, from intro psych to brain and behavior, and from child development to research methods. Sage also offers Vantage, an intuitive learning platform recommended by 9 out of 10 instructors who have used it. It integrates with your LMS, it's easy to set up, simple to use, so that you can focus on teaching, not troubleshooting. So check out what Sage College Publishing has to offer at psychsessions.org/sage and let them be your partner in teaching the science of being human.
Hi, my name is Drew Christopher. I joined SDP back in 1996 because I just wanted to be a better teacher, and I figured something called the Society for the Teaching of Psychology would help me in that regard, and it did. I became involved in a variety of task force, a variety of working groups, and so forth early on in my career. And looking back on it now, I think one of the biggest benefits wasn't just becoming a better teacher, but all the colleagues that I met along the way, and I'm still friends with today, who are also helping me still be a good teacher, if not a great teacher. Those professional connections have lasted a lifetime, and both personally and professionally, they're probably one of the most rewarding things that I can look back on the over 30 years I've been teaching and say it's probably the best thing I've ever done.
To join the Society for the Teaching of Psychology for only $35 a year, please visit teachpsych.org. APA Publishing wants to give you 15% off your order. If you teach classes like counseling, clinical psychopathology, or multicultural psychology, then this is for you. APA Publishing has books that are written by experts that are grounded in evidence and really help teachers. I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a book they have right now called Helping Skills. It's in its 6th edition, and it gives students clear, practical frameworks for understanding and learning counseling techniques. It's perfect for hands-on practice and skill development. Here's another one. Cultural Humility helps students build self-awareness and engage meaningfully across diverse identities and experiences. So head to apa.org because they want to give you 15% off your order today using code PS15. That's capital P, capital S, 15. Go check out APA Publishing. Folks, I'm here today with Jared Keeley, who is an associate professor at Virginia Commonwealth University, but you're also the director of a clinical psych program there. Is that right?
That is correct.
All right. And when did you start that second position?
So director of clinical training, this is my first year at it. So that's a new thing. Still kind of trying to figure out what I'm doing.
Yeah. How did that come about? Is it something that they tapped you for, or did you have aspirations to do it, or?
All of the above, right? So a lot of these programs usually have that kind of responsibility to rotate amongst faculty members. And just the way things are kind of playing out for our program, there's limited degrees of freedom in terms of kind of who hasn't already done it, as well as who's also taken up by other roles. And it's one that I've been interested in for a long time. My advisor, when I was in graduate school, served in that role for the bulk of the time that I was there, and was lucky enough to get he was very open and willing to share kind of what that process was like and what the role was like. And so it's always been an aspiration of mine.
Okay. Well, we'll get to your kind of backstory, because I know there's a connection for teachers of psychology. There's a pretty big connection to a giant in our field. And so we'll get to that. But can you just tell us a little bit about Virginia Commonwealth University? I've never been on campus. I don't have a good feel for like who are the students and how big is the program, et cetera.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we are a state university in Virginia. We're located in Richmond, technically downtown Richmond. And it's an interesting university in that it's got kind of like its historic academic kind of branch. And then it joined a medical school somewhere along the way. And so like they kind of became Virginia Commonwealth University when they combined themselves. And the academic campus and the medical campus literally bookend downtown Richmond. So like one is on one end and one is on the other with the main drag in between. So as a university, it's kind of got that interesting structure to it. It's an urban university. It's always perceived itself in that way. It's fully integrated into the city. So particularly on the medical campus, as well as to some degree on the academic campus. It's kind of hard to tell where campus ends and city begins. Like they just bleed into each other, kind of like you'll be walking along the street and like, oh yeah, that building is VCU, that building isn't. That building is ACU, that building is a church. It's just kind of like part of the community in that sort of way. And they've taken that very literally. They view themselves as a community serving institution. And so our student body comes from all over Virginia, but is very representative of the people that you would see in Richmond, broadly speaking. Most of our students are first gen, a lot of international students, a lot of kind of students from limited economic background. And it is also, again, kind of like a pull for, depending upon kind of where you see this role in different states, like there's kind of like sometimes you see the more prestigious or that's what I'm looking for. I guess, yeah, prestigious kind of academic institution. Then there's kind of like the people's school. We fall more into that role of the people's school, where everybody kind of goes. Yeah. Great. Are you from that area or you're not? No, where'd you grow up? I grew up in Colorado. And so, yeah, like born and raised in Colorado, went to undergraduate in Illinois, went to graduate school in Alabama, taught at Mississippi State University for about 7 years, and then came over here to Virginia. Okay. All right. So Colorado kid, and now you're on the East Coast. So, yeah, you still have family back in Colorado? I do. Okay. Yeah. Well, let's get into that backstory a little bit because, but before we do, I want to tell you about how I first heard your name, and it had to do, I'm pretty sure, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, if it had to do with some research that you did on the teacher behavior checklist. So maybe that in our circle with like this audience, that might be the way that people might have heard or seen your work. Is that right? Most likely. Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's talk a bit about that, and then we can go back for context to see how you got there. I realize that you kind of have two kind of streams of interest in your research and work. One is a scholarship of teaching and learning, and then the other one is this clinical work. Yeah. And maybe the clinical, it seems to me, you tell me if I'm wrong, seems like the clinical has sort of, you're kind of like leaning into the clinical these days. Is that right? Just from the standpoint of, I guess other context there is that in that whole time frame, also ended up having 2 kids.
Oh, yeah.
So I've got 2 little ones right now, and I found my research time to be pretty limited one way or the other, in all honesty.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've had some good opportunities to kind of do some interesting work in the clinical line. But I've always kind of viewed myself and kind of my professional identity in a lot of ways as teacher first. Like that's something that I think a lot of our listeners probably resonate with. And to me, the way in which I was trained and the way in which I think about science is that it's a perspective. It's a way of viewing what you do professionally, right? And so to me, when I think of myself as teacher, I don't see that as separate from viewing myself as scientist. Like if I'm doing teaching, I want to be evaluating it and thinking about it like a scientist would, right? I want to see, like, what am I doing? Is it working? How do I make it better? And so to me, it's the scholarship of teaching and learning has always just been naturally blended into that.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. So tell us about the teacher behavior checklist. And I do have because it had it had a day certainly where people were like, we need an assessment that is better than student evaluations, which maybe have their place in some way. But we need an assessment where we can kind of track the quality of teachers. And so you all created that. Can you just tell us a little bit about the instrument and how it's used and how it came about, et cetera?
Oh, yeah. So to tell the story, we have to lean into part of the story that you alluded to a moment ago, where this was the brainchild of Bill Buskist. And I'll give you a little bit of background about where this came from. He's always been very interested in excellent teaching and defining excellent teaching, figuring out what makes a good teacher good. One year he was on sabbatical, and as he tells the story, he hopped in a beat up old pickup truck and drove around the country interviewing teachers. And kind of one of the outcomes of that process, he found a whole bunch of award-winning teachers, people who really respected in their particular institutions, kind of like the best of the best. And we went around the country interviewing these folks. And the result of that was that he distilled a list of qualities that seemed to be common across them. And that list was kind of, again, like the intellectual precursor to the teacher behavior checklist. Where I kind of came into this story was as a young graduate student. He had done this work and he's like, hey, I really want to turn this into a teaching evaluation instrument. I think that would be a really valuable way to kind of use this. And so we worked together to try to kind of turn it into that sort of thing, to turn it into an evaluation tool, to be able to, at the time, he was most interested in graduate student teaching development, right? So one of his major roles was to train graduate students in teaching. One of the cool kind of components of the training at Auburn when I was there was that every student was trained as a teacher. And it was integrated into your first year and beyond. And so he wanted a way of being able to kind of do some feedback for his graduate students that was more structured than him kind of watching us do a practice lesson and then kind of giving us pointers. It's I want to be able to kind of give you feedback based upon a number of domains about how you're performing and how that would be tied into kind of a larger theory about how higher education operates and how people who teach in that field do it well. And so the instrument kind of came about from his kind of original interest in that, and then saying hey, there's also seems to be kind of this need for the instrument generally. There's a lot of, and this is probably still true to say it out loud, a lot of the instruments that we are kind of use in our individual institutions are often homegrown, right? They're the product of some committee who probably didn't know a whole lot about psychometric evaluation of instruments. And they probably didn't do a lot in terms of empirically evaluating the nature of their instrument that you're using. It probably didn't come from any sort of theory, right? Or kind of structure about kind of making sure that it's representative of all the domains we might want to assess. And so this was our attempt to build a better mousetrap. We're like, hey, we think we can contribute something with this.
Yeah. So can you talk to us about building an instrument like that? And I do. It's been a while, right? Do you remember what year you all published that?
That's a great question. I think we started the work in, oh goodness,
15?
Probably 2003 was when we started it. And I think the publication might have been 2006.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. But we're talking like a couple decades.
I mean, it's been 20 years at least.
Yeah. So, well, I have a couple questions for you, and maybe you have answers to them, maybe you don't. But if you were looking at the teacher behavior checklist today, what would you think about it?
Oh, yeah. No, there are definitely things we would change and things that I would do differently. And I think that's something that we kind of like looking across the body of literature we've been able to build up about this instrument. I mean, it's got some strengths, it's got some weaknesses. There's things that are definitely not ideal. I mean, the original version was built upon language where I guess I left out a portion of our development process where we took those kind of broad conceptual qualities that Bill had distilled qualitatively from his interviews with these teachers. And we were like, well, that's great to kind of think about these kind of conceptually and broadly. And, to be able to really kind of use this, we need to ground it in kind of what things students would see you do as a professor, right? To be able to say, like, here's when I recognize that quality is present. So we tried to develop some behavioral anchors is probably not quite the right word. It's not really that specific, but things like that. Right? Mm-hmm. And so one way we helped develop that was we gave students the list of qualities and then asked them to just generate, okay, so like what are things that you see your professors do that would be examples of that, right? And then those are then kind of included in the instrument as descriptors so that when a student is rating, like this particular descriptor being accessible, well, what are the things that make it show that a student or the professor is acceptable or accessible, right? Like posting student hours or those kinds of things. Those examples are also 20 years old.
Yeah.
And so like some of them, like if you're using the original version of the instrument, are like remarkably bizarrely outdated, like uses an overhead projector, things like that. And you're like, I don't think I've seen one of those in a long time. So there's definitely some updates just from sheerly kind of like the language itself, right? Of kind of things that need to be changed.
Well, I just got to say, I love it because I think it fills a vacuum or filled a vacuum. I guess this is all leading to my question is like, where is the 20 years later updated teacher behavior checklist, right? But I think this is something that we need language around and something that is maybe better than just what some committee puts out. So I don't, I forget, I just don't know what order to do this in, but why don't you just tell us about the checklist? Like how is it set out? Like I have a copy of it in front of me right now. And like it's a rating scale of 1 to 5. And then and it's alphabetical. So the first one is accessible, which is post office hours, gives out phone number and email information. Like, great. Yeah. You definitely want to check that out. Right. You want to check that off the list. So maybe just tell us a little bit about what kinds of other things are on here that you think are still great indicators of good teaching.
Yeah. So I think one thing that really has been striking to me in my work with this instrument and kind of looking at teaching evaluation, generally speaking, over the years, something that has been consistent in the literature is that when you look at any distillation of these kinds of items and these kinds of qualities across teaching evaluation instruments, if you try to like reduce the number of things on that list, particularly with like you're using kind of like factor analysis as a tool, you come up with 2 components. And these 2 components seem to be pretty commonly consistent across people who have done this in different settings, in different institutions, in different countries. You get one side of things is frankly the personal side. Like, do you like your professor? Are they personable? Do they kind of like engage with you? Are they warm? Like those sort of kind of like the relationship factors, right? With teaching, that seems to be one bulk of items. The other tends to be more technical in nature, right? So like, how are their skills at presentation, right? Like what are the things that they do? How good are they at dealing with, technology? Those kinds of things tend to cluster together as well.
Hmm.
And when you ask both students and teachers, like which ones do they think are the most important, there's some consistent winners. And they sometimes they agree about things, sometimes they don't. Professors tend to think more about the technical side. Students tend to think more about the relationship side. That's not that surprising. But the most important thing across all of those, and this is, again, something that's been very striking to me, is passion. So if the professor is able to demonstrate their passion for what they do, that's the most important thing. And I think that probably resonates pretty clearly with most folks who have kind of reflected on this.
That is so not surprising to me that it would be, that everything else would be seen differently if you have somebody who really cares about what they're doing and is passionate for student learning as well, right?
Exactly.
And then we probably get into personality and all kinds of things as well at that point. What are there any items that and I know I'm just like throwing up questions at you, but are there any items off the top of your head that that are sort of indicators for passion?
So I guess a lot of the ways in which I think it comes across are the enthusiasm, right, that the person has for the topic, right? So it's something that, like they are clearly engaged with and excited about. That comes across. You can't fake that. I mean, people try. I've seen people try. But if you don't have it, students know. They can tell. They're like, yeah, this isn't that fun to you either, is it?
Oh, yeah. Like, I'm sure that there is. I mean, I know this exists. I was sitting in a teaching demonstration for a part-time faculty member at our institution a while back. And this person was, and I think you're just trying to teach, the right way, in quotes, whatever that means. Make sure you get the content and stuff, but zero passion. Just I couldn't fathom being a student in this person's class. Well, guess what? We hired this person, which is, I'm sure they can grow into it. They could be mentored into it. But I wonder if teaching programs are talking about passion. I wonder if did Bill talk to you about get excited about what you're doing? What was your experience in your training at Auburn?
So I got so lucky. And being able, because I knew kind of coming into graduate school, I knew I really loved teaching. I wanted that to be a part of my career. I wanted that to be a part of my professional life. And part of why I picked Auburn was that they did have, really one of the best teaching training programs available at the time. And the way in which that manifested was that for us, every first year PhD student, regardless of what program they were affiliated with or what their area of work was, we all were responsible for teaching lab sections of intro psych. And we were all enrolled in a teaching of psych class with Bill for the whole first year while we did that. And we talked about all kind of components of teaching as part of that. Like we got to practice our teaching. We had to do practice lessons. We had to get feedback from each other. We developed syllabi. We developed a teaching philosophy. We kind of engaged in, a lot of things that were kind of ways of both just kind of orienting us to how this is done, but also kind of broader socialization about okay, so here is how, professionals do this work and get support from each other. We all had to join the Division II listserv, and to be kind of during the course of that year and kind of post to it and engage with it in ways. And that's only the first year. the training then kind of like also kind of continued. So like there were, Bill would offer kind of like other upper level elective kind of like teaching courses. Right. So like we'd have like a course on teaching critical thinking, or we'd have a course on engaging, in kind of like broader, kind of like cultural inclusion, or like we would have a course on fill in the blank, and kind of like he would kind of offer some of these as we would go, and developed like it was termed a teaching fellows program, so that folks would then have a chance to teach their courses. They would take these upper level classes and kind of continue their teaching training for the whole time they were there. One of the cool aspects of it as well is that he also had an ongoing research lab engaged in the scholarship of teaching and learning. And so a lot of students were also drawn to that because again, across all of our other interests, this was something that was common to us. And we were like, oh, this is cool. We want to engage in what we're doing in the classroom and kind of figure out some ways of doing it better. And so we were able to model that and kind of like create that community amongst ourselves as well.
Wow. And I bet, when you think about Bill in that context, that he was a passionate teacher.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That program was kind of renowned. When I talked to folks about it who were friends with Bill at the time, and just the quality of teachers that he put out afterwards was fantastic. And this is what a lot of people aren't trained to do. I know, like my backstory is that I had none of what you were talking about. And so I had to learn it all in career. And thank goodness that some people kind of lent me a hand, like we are lending a hand to this part-time faculty member, right? We're gonna do the work. We're gonna do the mentoring with them. And if you don't have it formally, you have to find it informally.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
I think that's just one of the, my own pet peeves about academia writ large, right? Is this belief that if you know the content, you know how to teach the content, right? Like that it's assumed that those skills are kind of ingrained in kind of like just knowing the content itself. And that's totally false. It's an entirely independent skill set.
Yeah. So like what sticks out to you? Like what's your superpower coming out of a program like that? Like you learned how to teach, you learned how to assess, you learned how to engage in a professional community. Like what were the big takeaways for you that have really paid off, like moving forward into your career?
Absolutely. I'll try to keep the list short.
Yeah.
But I think to me, one of the most important things was that establishing being part of the community, right? So, again, with the scholarship of teaching and learning component of it, we would all pile in our cars and drive over to Atlanta for the Southeastern Teaching of Psychology Conference every year. So CTOP became kind of like legendary for us in a lot of ways. And I know it's still kind of well recognized amongst folks. And like, I met so many people from going to that conference, people who are, like giants in this field and so well recognized. And I was like, one of the things I loved about that conference as much as anything was that I'm sure you've had this experience too. Everybody is so approachable. Everybody is there to kind of be with each other, support each other, and it really became an academic home. It became kind of like a feeling like, oh yeah, like these are my people. And that support is kind of probably one of the most important factors, I think, of kind of what I got from there. Yes, I got a lot of great advice. I got a lot of great technical skills. I got a lot of, like practice. Like, so by the time I was applying to my first faculty job, like I had taught a couple of different courses, and like had preps ready to go for intro and stats. So people are like, yes, we will hire you tomorrow. You ready?
Wow. Yeah. So your experience on the job market was like a pretty positive one coming out of grad school.
I'm very fortunate to be able to recognize that, like the training that I had, like, it set me aside because I was ready to go. They didn't have to mentor me in that same level. I was happy to get additional mentoring, of course, and kind of like there's a lot more to learn. But compared to the people that I was applying with, I had a lot of the already ready to go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you know what's interesting about that? I like how you said it set you aside. I talk in terms like this when I think about my career, because I spent 6-7 years in a 1-year appointment at Highline College, and it was just a renewal every year. But that was just going to be how it was. And at some point, year 3, year 4, I started looking at full-time faculty jobs. I'm in the community college system. And I started looking at jobs, and maybe by year 4 or 5, I was starting to apply for them, hearing nothing back ever. Just I would throw it out there, and it was just like into the wind. And then I realized that because I didn't have all that training, because I wasn't a very good teacher at that point, that I needed to really get involved. It's the community really that saved me, like getting into STP, becoming friends with, Sue Franz was a mentor of mine, and I worked with her. And then, but that little department loved teaching that I was a part of. But what ended up happening for me is the way I set myself aside was not through kind of the traditional route of becoming a great teacher, having these course preps, which would make you a valuable member to any kind of faculty, right? But for me, it was, I started a conference. I needed to do something that was just non-traditional. I couldn't hang with folks who were well-trained. So I had to find a way to set myself apart. And what that did for me is when I started Tip Northwest, which is now, I think, 12 years or something like that. I'm not part of it anymore. But when I started it, that unlocked something for me where I was like, oh, you can start things. You can like, that's a skill. So anyway, I came at my current job kind of, I guess, like a little non-traditionally. But what ended up happening is when I started getting involved with SDP, had some of these kind of wins on the side, that stuff gets picked up on a CV. And all of a sudden I was getting calls for full-time job interviews, right? And so that's how it worked for me. I think I'm glad it worked that way, but I really do. I do some, and I wonder how many listeners are kind of feeling this. Like, I think many of us wish we had your experience, you know?
Yeah. No, I recognize just how lucky I was to get what I had. Because again, like part of learning about the field and understanding the way things work, I got to see like just how uncommon it was, honestly. And it's kind of sad how uncommon it was. And it's still the case, to be honest. Like things have moved, that needle has shifted. There's more training available. It is more common than it used to be. And it's still got a long way to go.
What happens at VCU with like your grad student programs and teaching, and have you found a way to kind of integrate that, or did it exist before you, or doesn't it exist?
It existed before I got here. So we do have kind of, again, like a teaching of psych course. We have students who then kind of are able to go through that, and that's a prerequisite before they can teach their own class. We've got students who are able to teach in a variety of ways. One of the things that I guess I really appreciated about Auburn was the intentionality with which it was kind of integrated into the overall kind of like training program. Here, it is more of a, if you want it, you go get it kind of orientation and arrangement, where it's not considered default. It's not considered just part of what we're going to do as training you.
What are the programs where students would enroll in, graduate programs where they would be teaching? Like, is it a clinical program? Is it like, what's the program?
So we've got a lot of graduate programs. We've got clinical, counseling, psychology, health, developmental, and social. We've actually got a really broad kind of graduate offering. And so again, students are coming to us for a variety of different purposes. I think one of the things I didn't quite articulate was that, again, like VCU as a school is very community oriented and community engaged. And our department lives that as much as we are able. Like, we are very community engaged in the way that we kind of go about our training and our research. And so a lot of students come to us because they want to go do X in the community, right? Like, they're kind of like, there are a handful of folks who come to us and we're looking for kind of like a more traditional academic kind of life, right? Where they're going to be teaching and that sort of thing afterwards. But that's not as big a pull, I think, for the students that are coming here.
Right. Are you involved in any of that mentoring for students at this point, or?
Only from time to time, unfortunately, because of the other roles they've pulled me into. But we've got some excellent people who are kind of teaching that class and kind of like providing structure and kind of like, again, like getting people on that pathway. The way that we've kind of been also kind of doing that mentoring for students who do end up kind of teaching their own course is that's very one-on-one, right? So like if like it is a class that you have taught before, then you kind of end up kind of like diving in and you're the person that's kind of the go-to contact for whomever is kind of like trying to weed their way through understanding how to structure it all and get it set up. So I've been fortunate enough to get to do that from time to time, depending upon, kind of how that gets distributed amongst all the faculty that are out there. But it is something that I have unfortunately not been as engaged with as maybe I would hope.
Yeah. Well, things ebb and flow, right? So, okay. So let's tie off like the teacher behavior checklist. Could you what happened with it over 20 years? Did other people do research on it? Did people use it? What's the status of it now as an instrument?
Yeah. Bill and I, along with other colleagues, continue to do work with it. Other people definitely picked it up. At one point, we were trying to maintain a list of all the folks that we knew about who were using it, and we kind of gave up after a while. Because it was kind of, again, like a lot of folks adopted it either for personal use or even for some, like it was like a kind of like departmental or even institutional adaptation where they just kind of adopted it as their standard. Over the years, one of the things that's been very interesting to me is the international interest in it. So it's been picked up in a lot of places across the world. So in other educational contexts, and I've got to learn some about, like the German educational system or, how things work in Brazil or, because colleagues have kind of come across it and picked up on it and then wanted to kind of engage in research with it themselves. And so that's a direction that has definitely gone over time is kind of increasing internationality and kind of like interest in using it. And some of the research that's come from that is thinking about and trying to understand, okay, in what ways is higher education different across cultures, across countries? In what ways is it not? There are some differences, it turns out. Like there are kind of, again, regional specific things, right? So for example, students in Japan really, really, really want you to be an expert. Like that's kind of the most important thing in their head. They want to know that they're in good hands because you know it all. Versus other places are like, no. Like knowledge is much more socially constructed. We want you to be engaged with us in the learning process. So there's definitely kind of differences in those sorts of ways. But like I was saying, there are some of those commonalities like passion, right? Like that seems to be, again, doesn't matter where you are. That's what's important. That's a direction that it's gone. Kind of working with Georgina Wilson-Dunges, we ended up adapting it for online classes, kind of coming out of COVID. We're like, oh gosh, this doesn't really do a very good job of capturing what's going on in an online sort of structure or virtual structure. So we adapted it, got that kind of changed. You had said earlier a little bit ago, it's like, where's the kind of the future of this? Where is it going? Where's the next version? That's been sitting on my desk, sadly, for a long time.
Yeah.
Like I had mentioned, like those anchors, like they're out of date. Like they need to be updated. They need better language. And we went through a process of doing that. And it is sat on my desk because I'm like, oh gosh, yeah, I'll get to that.
Yeah. You know what I love about it? You know how I like to use it? It's been a while since I've looked at it, but now that I'm seeing it again, it's just like a self-assessment. It really is. it just is pretty holistic in the like how it hits teaching from like every angle. And, I guess if there are some things that the person feels like, well, that doesn't really apply in my context, or I see things a little bit differently, they can, well, you tell me if they can take and leave it as a self kind of assessment to improve teaching. I think it will open up some of your strengths and also maybe let you gain a little insight into some of your weaknesses and where you need to put some work into. But how should it be used if folks were using it for their own development?
Oh yeah. No, I think you're hitting the nail on the head, because we've been kind of talking about it almost more as a summative sort of instrument, right? Where you can kind of use it and kind of like the ways in which, like we use those instruments, every semester at the end to be able to kind of like, incorporate that into what the department needs to document what it's doing. But you're right. Like when we developed it, we really did develop it as a formative measure. We wanted to be able to kind of say, okay, so like, how does somebody take this and figure out what do they need to do better? Right. And so like in my own use of it, so I still give it myself in every class, mid-semester and end of semester at least. And the way that I have found it to be the most helpful for me is kind of within person, right? So like I'm able to look across the items and say like, okay, so like where are things seem to be going well, right? Where are things kind of relatively not as strong? I say, oh, okay, let me think about where's that coming from? It does also as an instrument, it's got included, and again, some people use this, some people don't, the additional student comments, right? So like a place for people to be able to write in and say, okay, what is going well? What is not going well? I have actually over time kind of evolved those prompts for myself and my own use of it, where I prompt specifically for things that students like and would like to see more of, and things that they thought, like could be improved or they want to see, less of. And that additional information usually helps me kind of like figure out why this particular rating was lower than that one.
Yeah.
Because they'll say so, right? They'll kind of like follow up and say, oh, one of the things I really would have liked to see more of was blah. I'm like, oh, okay, now I see why you wrote that a 3 instead of a 5. Okay. And now that sort of feedback is usually what I end up doing to be able to shape what I do next time.
Yeah. Well, folks, I think if you just Google it, you can find it pretty easily. But where do you have a spot you point people to locate it, or?
You can always get it. It's built into that first publication. So like that first paper. So if you have access to that, you can get it that way. If you can't access that for some reason or another, maybe, like institutional access or what have you, it's always like, I'm always happy to share it. You can always just email me. That's probably the easiest way to do it. Mm-hmm. So if this is, again, recorded, my email address, if you can attach it to something, we can do that, or I'll say it out loud here.
Yeah, say it. That's fine. Yeah.
JWKEELEY at V as in Victor, CU.edu. And I'm happy to send it to you.
And did you and Georgina publish that online version of it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
It's out there. And so, yeah, again, like if you're interested in that version, also happy to kind of circulate that one too.
Yeah, I'm going to go find that because I would love to see what you all did with that as somebody who teaches online. I've actually found some of the evaluation tools for online just very, very challenging for whatever reason. So, yeah, I'll be interested to see it.
That's something that we kind of saw a need for in particular. Like, look, it's not the same beast. It's not the same animal. It doesn't have the same skills. Students aren't there for the same reasons, right? Like there's a lot of differences. And if you try to just take a evaluation from an in-person class and shove it in there, you don't get the information that you need.
Yeah. You're probably aware of, and it's been a while since I've looked at this literature, but you're probably aware that there are certain people and groups of people who on these kinds of evaluations score less, don't score as well. So almost like, that these for some people are not a great comparison tool. What sense do you make out of all that?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. Because you're right. Like when we look at, especially if you're looking at this like a summative sort of way, right? We're looking like across people, across groups, across time. There are systematic biases in these ratings. That's there. It's baked into it. Some people argue, well, it's the nature of the instrument. And I think that's true. That can be part of it, right? Excuse me. It's also the nature of the people filling them out. And I think that's where we kind of stumble is like, oh, well, these are just human biases. These are biases that we share as human beings about groups and people when we come from particular backgrounds and contexts. And those end up showing up when we kind of rate teachers or if we were to do this sort of task with anybody. Excuse me. And I think that's unfortunate. I wish that the world were not that. And at the same time, it is that. And we have to take that into account when we look at these things. It's one of the reasons that I think, like you were kind of alluding to, that using the instrument in a formative way where you're comparing yourself to yourself is much more valuable than like trying to say like, oh, well, yeah, your ratings are 0.03 higher than this person's, and therefore you get the extra bump in your raise.
Yeah.
Like it's not meant to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I mean, I'm glad you said it. It's really good for people to hear it. And again, I would give this to colleagues, and I just think it's just such a great self-reflective tool. So very, very cool. And I can't wait to see that online version. Okay, so I have a couple other questions for you because, now we know kind of from grad school onward, we know some of your story, but can you just tell us, how did you get into psychology? At what point? And maybe we can just start in high school. Like, what kind of a student were you, and were you thinking about college at that point in time?
Oh, that's a great place to start for this. Yeah. High school, I've always been a nerd. Like, let's call it what it is. Like, I am full on, always been a nerd. Always been very kind of interested in intellectual stuff. Like, I took Latin for fun. Like,
got it. Yeah. You checked the box. Great.
Yeah. And so I guess, from that standpoint, kind of I knew, like, again, I've always been very engaged with intellectual stuff, right? So kind of like going into college, I knew that was something that was really important for me. I also got bit by the teaching bug already in high school, but it was in kind of an unconventional sort of way. So this is also speaking to the nerdiness. My school had a fencing team, and I was like, ooh, that sounds cool. And actually the interest developed because my brother is 10 years older than me. He used to run track both in high school and in college. And that when he went off to college, he wanted to do something in the off season to keep himself in shape, and he started fencing. And so he came back home and was like, brother, you're going to love this. And started taking me to lessons with him. And I was like, you're right. This is cool. So I thought it was kind of a fun sport for me. They call it physical chess for a reason. Like, it's very, again, like you're trying to kind of like outpredict your opponent in a lot of ways. So in high school, I was showing up to this high school fencing team with prior experience, which was kind of unheard of. Like, most people don't, it's not a common sport. It's not a lot of people out there who've done it. Right. And so coming in with that, the coach was like, you want to help out? I was like, sure. So I started leading lessons, like I would help kind of teach the other folks, like ended up kind of like moving into like a team captain sort of position where I kind of help organize practices. And, like there's kind of like both like a didactic component to practices as well as kind of a practical where you're actually doing it. And they sent me off to a coach's college. So like the sport of fencing at the time was interested again in promoting itself and getting more kind of clubs out there, getting more people. And they realized the way they had to do that was to train coaches. And so they would offer these coaches colleges once a year. And so my club paid for me to go to that, which was really cool. And so I learned how to teach fencing as a high school student. And so then I thought that was really fun. When I went to college, they didn't have a fencing team, but they used to. All the equipment was like literally sitting in a dusty basement. And so I was like, hey, could I restart this and coach it? And they're like, yes. And so I kind of got the teaching bug in a way, honestly, from teaching fencing.
What college did you go to?
It's Knox College. It's in Galesburg, Illinois, kind of one of those small liberal arts schools. And I guess kind of went on a bit too far of a tangent. Maybe you were asking about how I got interested in psychology. That was also kind of a similar trajectory for me. Right. So in high school, I went to a school where it was a private school, and we engaged in service projects. Right. So like we would go into the community and work with different groups, and everybody kind of signed up for certain ones. And it was in this like little interim period between, the fall and the spring. And the one that I picked was to work at a home for folks with autism. And I was like, this is interesting. I've always kind of wanted to understand a little bit better and kind of, and that's probably where my start of interest in psychology began, was kind of working with these folks and kind of like understanding, well, like, oh yeah, there's some bizarre behaviors sometimes that they do. Because the place that I was working was, again, like for much more kind of profound kind of levels of the disorder. These are folks who didn't have any other place to go, more or less. And so they've been kind of like living there long term. So there was mostly older adults and middle-aged adults at this particular place. And so like it was kind of, again, like some of those people were nonverbal. Some of those people, again, have kind of, again, like very stereotyped behaviors. And working there and working in that setting was like, oh, I think I understand kind of like, like some of the things that they're communicating just in different ways, right? Or that they are, like, I think I see kind of like where, like this behavior from the outside seems really bizarre, but I'm like, I think I can kind of understand where it's coming from, or kind of like what function it's serving, with talking with the staff and kind of trying to, again, like talk about their own daily routines and like, oh yeah, so-and-so over here. Yeah, he's just trying to kind of like put you off. Like, don't worry about it. Like, okay, like he does that to every new person. Don't worry. Like, it's just a thing. I was like, oh, okay. And so like, I start to kind of like understand again, like the motivation kind of like where these things came from, and how that was maybe not that different from my own experience. So I could use the same ways of understanding my own life. And so then going into college, that's again where it was kind of like, I think this is what I want to do. I think this is something that would be really interesting for me. Also, while I was at Knox, I had the very good fortune to, it's an undergrad only institution, had the very good fortune to serve as a teaching assistant for at the time called abnormal psych class. Got to work with a guy named Tim Kasser, who was a fantastic teacher, and really kind of formative in my own development. And he invited me to kind of be a TA for that class because I had done relatively well, I guess, the first time round with it. And that also kind of solidified this for me. I was like, I really enjoyed that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you, as a freshman, you declare a psych major like right out of the gate at that point? Yeah. Okay.
Did actually.
Uh-huh. And then did you have an idea like at what point did you realize that you were going to grad school?
That's a good question. I had that was not on my radar in any sort of way, shape, or form. Kind of when I was kind of entering, didn't even know that was really a thing. If I'm being honest.
Yeah, no, I had the same experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was through mentoring, in particular with Tim Kasser, who was saying like, I think you'd be well suited to this. Like if you're kind of moving in the field, like this is the level of education that's required to do these kinds of things. I was like, those are the things I want to do.
Yeah.
Okay, then. It's like, so he got me engaged in his research. I served as a research assistant for somebody who was doing an honors thesis, and then did my own honors thesis while I was kind of like, kind of getting my feet wet with what research was like. Again, coming from a small liberal arts school, the structure that was engaged in that, I don't think if I had been at one of these big, institutions, I probably wouldn't have sought that out, right? I don't think I would have been brave enough to kind of like on my own go forth and say, here, I'm interested in this. It was more that like folks were able to say, I think you'd be good at this and kind of pull me into it. And so I was, again, lucky from that standpoint to have kind of landed where I did in that way. Because otherwise, I'm sure my life trajectory might have gone a totally different direction.
It's interesting that you've had these like pretty significant mentors over time. And I think lots of people have mentors, but in your case, I think I'm hearing my podcast partner, Eric's voice in my head saying, that's not lucky. That means there's something about you as a mentee that is like that folks would want to take you under their wing to do something like that. So that's really neat. And then how did you choose Auburn? What was that process like?
Mm-hmm. So I had mentioned that kind of work I was doing with autism. I continued that actually. So my honors thesis when I was at Knox, I was like, I think I want to ask some questions about autism. I think I'm going to be an autism researcher. And so when I applied to graduate school, I applied to a bunch of places where there were autism researchers doing things. Auburn at the time was operating under a admissions structure that I don't think exists anymore, where they didn't have you pick a mentor straight off. Right. What they did was they kind of accepted a class of people. And, like when you were interviewing, you're interviewing with different people and kind of like seeing where the fit would be. At the time, there was a couple of different people who were doing autism work at Auburn. And so I was like, I think this would actually be a great fit. Right. I get there. And one of them was like, actually, no, I'm starting up this ABA program. And so I'm not going to have room for any more graduate students. Sorry. Okay. Another one was like, I met with one of his students was like, if you work with him, you're probably never going to see him. So like I had an office that was across the hall from where this guy was. And the student was right. Like he came in, he taught a class and then he went fishing. And I think in my number of years that I was there, I saw him maybe twice.
Wow.
I'm like, okay, dodged a bullet there. I was, again, lucky enough in that part of that interview process for the person I did end up working with to have realized something I didn't, who's like, oh, the questions you're asking about autism, they're actually classification of psychopathology questions. Maybe that's what you want. And he was right. And so I ended up working with Roger Blashfield, who was my advisor there for the clinical side of things.
It's interesting to show up, think you're going to be maybe mentored by these people. Very disappointing in some ways to realize that they're not a great fit.
I think there's a lot of examples in my own career as I think about and reflect on it where there's a lot of fortuitous moments, right? Or kind of a lot of things where I was like, that worked out very well. Like, and again, wasn't necessarily meaning that other things wouldn't have worked out in a different way if that choice hadn't happened or if that particular event hadn't happened in that way. But I can see kind of those moments where like, okay, if that hadn't been that way, I would have ended up somewhere else altogether.
So PhD in clinical psychology from Auburn, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then did you think that you were going to go teach, or did you think that you were going to go practice after that?
Yeah, I am, again, probably a rarity in a lot of those clinical psych programs. There are folks who come in academically oriented for sure. Most going through that process are definitely practice oriented as a default, pretty commonly. I always knew I wanted to go academic. Like I was always like, I love that teaching part. I love that so much. I don't want to miss that. I didn't know to what extent that was going to be a blend of my activities. I didn't know how much was going to be clinical work versus teaching versus research versus service, et cetera. But I knew I wanted teaching to at least be a big portion of it.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, I've heard a lot of folks talk about, academia. Again, there's positives, there's negatives, there's good sides, there's bad sides. As a career, I have never seen anything more flexible or kind of more self-determined. And that's the part that I love the most.
Me too. I love that part. Jared, what are you working on these days? I saw something on your profile about, is it the World Health Organization or something like that? Or
yeah. So yeah, that's again one of those fortuitous sorts of things where the work that I was doing with my advisor Roger had been largely looking at how clinicians make decisions and how they classify psychopathology and how they organize that information. And so I was honestly on my master's thesis was trying to kind of find a way to reanalyze some data he had from another doctoral student who asked and borrowed kind of some methodology from anthropology to ask clinicians how they would organize disorders, using similar methodology to what anthropologists use to, for example, like ask indigenous peoples, how do you classify these plants like that are in your environment? Because like it was kind of an interesting analogy. It was like, oh yeah, those are the things in the clinician's environment. How do they organize them? And so we borrowed that kind of methodology. Turns out the folks who were developing the next edition of the International Classification of Diseases through World Health Organization stumbled across that work. And they're like, actually, that's what we want. Like, we want to be able to understand how do groups from different places organize this stuff so that we know if it's all matching up and lining up when we construct our manual. And so I got the good fortune to then kind of like launch into their work as they were doing kind of initial field trials, so they'd contacted Roger and this other student, Beth Flanagan, and me saying like, hey, how did you do this study? Because we'd like to replicate it. I was like, oh, that's cool. So like they go about and they start doing this. They kind of gather, like they use this methodology and gather it in a bunch of different countries. They come back and say, hey, we can't find enough folks in the US. Would you be willing to, gather some of these data? I was like, sure. Like I'll hop on and, started gathering the data. A little bit later, they come back and say, Roger, how do you analyze this? Roger's like, I don't know. Talk to Jared. It's like, okay. They call me up literally on the phone and say, can you walk us through how you analyze this? I'm like, sure. Talk them through it and say, here's how you do it. A couple of weeks later, they call back and say, would you just do it for us? It's like, sure. And it was kind of one of those kind of snowballing kinds of things where I ended up kind of getting involved in their field trial process. And from there, became a member of what they called their field studies coordinating group, where kind of like I was fortunate enough, again, to kind of get part of their process of investigating as they're developing this new classification. How are clinicians actually using it? Like, how is it being received? How do they understand it? What parts do they not understand? How can we clarify it? Very kind of human factors kind of work in a certain sort of way. And that has been, kind of a major chunk of the work that I've done.
Yeah, interesting. What is the takeaway that folks should, because we know about this, like this other manual, right? The DSM is still widely used here in the United States. What is your kind of takeaway feeling between the two diagnostic manuals?
Oh, you've opened up a can of worms. I'll try to be brief. I have lots of thoughts about that. First is that if you ask your average U.S. mental health professional or allied professional, right, like what is the official classification system of the U.S., they would say DSM, and they would be wrong. Technically, we actually are, the ICD is the official classification system in the U.S. We, as members of the World Health Organization, are treaty bound to report health statistics using ICD. And so officially, that is the system. The reason DSM is so commonly used is that technically, like in legal speak, it's a guild choice, right? It's that as a profession, everybody uses it, and thus it is the professional standard. If every person in the US started using something else, that would be the professional standard. I have other thoughts about that, but I'll leave it at that.
Well, yeah, that's really helpful to know. I would love to hear your other thoughts on it, but maybe that's for another conversation. Maybe I'll run into you at a conference and we can have a coffee and chat through it. Jared, thank you so much for your time today. It was really good to finally meet you. I'm sorry we didn't run into each other in person at a conference a couple months ago, but I saw your name on the list, but then you weren't able to make it. So
indeed. Yeah.
Thanks, Jared.
Hey everyone, Garth here. Thanks for listening to Psych Sessions. If you could go to wherever you listen to our podcast and you would follow that podcast or like it, it really does help us as we are trying to get out to more teachers of psychology. Also, if you haven't checked out our website, please visit psychsessions.org and sign up for our monthly newsletter. We offer free resources and valuable news that you are going to want to know related to the teaching of psychology. Thanks.